beginning of the 19th century, human brains expanded. A new compartment of the organ had evolved as a result of elevated levels of thought and cogitation. The canithalamus enabled clever dicks to come up with some of the most extraordinary scientific conceptualizing. This additional fleshy nodule at the base of the brain would give the likes of Faraday and Brunel the capacity to think longer, harder, whilst eliminating any undesirable monkey symbols which would often stymie the thought process. Not everyone was able to fully ignite the power of the canithalamus, however, and mankind would therefore continue to see ill-thought-through theorizing and amateurish scientific rigour. While Nicholas Appert astonished the world with the first canning process for food, Mitchell Flurry's attempt to preserve asparagus spears indefinitely using just walrus skin was not just ineffective but highly toxic. And as Baron Karl von Drees introduced the dandy horse, an early velocipede and the precursor to the modern bicycle, Sandy Carmichael III's early prototype of a space hopper proved disastrous when she was propelled headfirst off Beachy Head. Science was the new black, the new Friday, the new Wunderbar. But with every reasonable advancement, there was a gamut of incomprehensible calamities kicked to the curb with utter contempt. I'm Sir General Roland Frampton, and I'll be recognising the sweat, blood and tears of those who didn't quite make the grade. So the next time you find yourself describing the beauty of Thomas Saint's first sewing machine to a stout seamstress or a Chinese factory owner, kindly remember Harry Rednose would have beaten Saint to the UK Patent Office with his own design if he'd only avoided stitching his arm to the machine he was making final assessments on. We live in a world of fine margins.
A Brief History of Failure, presented by Sir General Roland Frampton. Episode 4, Science and Stamps.
So let us away to the first half of the 19th century, when the boffin brigades ruled supreme, their inventions creating hysteria in the streets and outhouses, while pretenders to these crowns of innovation crumbled into obscurity. The turn of the century witnessed the birth of flight. Soon after the Montgolfier brothers' balloon carried its first passengers, namely a sheep, a duck and a rooster, a spate of aeronautical fuckwits sought to emulate this magnificent achievement. On March the 11th, 1801, the Times of London reported on the Duchess of Cornwall's notorious flight of the chaise longue, which lasted little over a minute, with only flimsy silk ribbon strapping her to the seat of this highly ridiculed piece of furniture. The Duchess launched herself off Mont Blanc in the French Alps with much predicted consequences. This brave but foolhardy slip into oblivion prompted a spate of attempts at flight using capes. With me is Boeing's chief engineer, Hadley Wrench, who has a PhD in aeronautics and witchcraft. Hadley, what examples of early cape flight have you come across on your travels?
Thanks for having me, Sir Roland. Competitions for the first caped flight were held all over Europe and America.
I understand a prize was offered up for the first manned cape flight. Tell me, what was the criteria if one was to win?
To claim the prize of $10,000, offered up by railway magnate Benjamin Hotpants, which in today's money is roughly $10,000, the caped flyer had to cover a vertical distance of 9 miles.
Eminently doable, I would imagine.
You'd think so, but the challenge proved insurmountable for most. Gladys Wandergash, who spent 2 years knitting her cape, lost her life in roughly the same number of seconds when she pitched off the slopes of Glencoe in Scotland. And Brad Gulp, a steelworker from Pennsylvania, plummeted violently to the earth shortly after stepping off his front stoop. You can still see the bloodstains on the sidewalk today.
What had he constructed his cape from?
Steel.
As Beethoven plays to full houses at his first residency at the Berg Theatre in Vienna, Henry Cavendish dots the I's and crosses the T's on Newton's gravitational constant and is finally able to provide an accurate measurement for the weight of the Earth. Cavendish's number of 6 billion gigatons was, however, refuted by the Royal Society for the Observance of Obscene Dining, which revealed several of its members had already arrived at significantly different values. William Paul Jr. was an honorary member of the RSOOD and could consume a pigeon sandwich in 11 seconds. Paul offered up a value of £3 4 ounces for the planet's mass after amputating and weighing the big toe on his right foot and multiplying that by the first figure that came into his head. Sir Roland Baum, RSOOD treasurer and holder of the Society's record for ingesting pickled squirrels, cited a value of 8 trillion tons after reportedly weighing several mountains near his home in Aldershot. Finally, Lord McEmery of Prestwick, who would often be seen gorging himself on French toast with no visible safety harness, maintained the earth was, quote, very heavy indeed. After much reflection, however, McEmery amended and resubmitted his estimate as exceptionally heavy. When asked what he thought of these rebuttals, Cavendish was reported to have said, "Are these tossers on low-grade cannabis, or what?" I'm at the Science Museum in South Kensington, London, where my mother would bring me in the summer holidays because she didn't have an iPad that would keep me amused while she went off drinking and whoring. I'm talking computers with museum curator Dr. Wilf Spangle. Wilf, we have some fine contraptions in front of us here. I understand these were all presented to the father of the computer, Charles Babbage, but he quickly savaged their creators, dismissing them as bollocks.
Well, that's your average tech autocrat for you.
What's the first machine here?
Let me see if I can get it started. So, this machine was engineered by Herbert Morris Strangeways, and it uses a rudimentary peg and washboard technique. See how the peg moves randomly across the board as the machine attempts to calculate the data input.
Fascinating. And its success rate at being able to crunch the numbers?
0.
What about this second contraption, Dr. Spangle?
This was a much faster engine which employed the ratchet and rod system you see here. Designed by Dutch canal digger Steve Jobs, data was added via the hole punch entry point on the east wing of the machine.
It's quite the size, isn't it?
And then, the mechanical sequences could then apply the necessary calculations.
And this was a general-purpose programmable computing engine?
No, this was a piece of shit.
I'm assuming the third machine was also of little use.
Well, that's where you're wrong. This contraption was recovered from the New Mexico desert near a place called Roswell by a woman named Carmen Rodriguez. It was all very hush-hush, and Miss Rodriguez claimed she was probed quite roughly after handing the machine over to the authorities. The machine is so advanced that no one was able to determine how it functioned until 2 years ago.
Astonishing. But who had the foresight to build something so advanced back then?
Space badgers.
One giant of history who couldn't bear everyone banging on about how sciencey they were or what new invention they had up their sleeve was sailing rock star Lord Horatio Nelson. Fortunately, Nelson had the Napoleonic Wars to keep him busy, until, of course, that fateful day in 1805 when, at the Cape of Trafalgar, a Spanish sniper took aim and took the Englishman out of commission. As he lay dying, Nelson reportedly asked of his flag captain, "Kiss me, Hardy." The following recording from the BBC archives features a 1972 episode of Hello Sailor, a weekly nautical broadcast on Radio 4. Its presenter, Diane Mitchell-Twitch, pours doubt over the hero's request.
And so to what Nelson uttered as he lay mortally wounded in the bowels of HMS Victory, the Battle of Trafalgar already won. Conventional wisdom tells us he asked his flag captain, Thomas Hardy, for a smacker. Many upstanding heterosexual sailors at the time, and some downstanding ones, refuted the notion that these two roughhouse warriors had a quick snog before the Viscount died, maintaining any of several other utterances could have passed between them. A popular alternative of what Nelson actually said to Hardy appears to be of a culinary nature. As Nelson invited Hardy to lean in closer, he said, "Don't forget to take the mince out of the fridge for supper, darling." While this request was still tinged with homoerotic overtones, it seems Nelson's crew of macho diehards were happy with this version given it contained a solid reference to meat. The long-held belief in this spurious substitute is in spite of Emma Hamilton's deathbed confession some 8 years after her lover's death, when she confirmed Horatio was oft to tickle a young man's tonsils.
It's 1832, and the sound of a new electric telegraphic code has entered the ether. Samuel Morse's development of a sequence of short and long signals to represent text characters, his dots and dashes, has provided a fatal blow to others in this field of discovery. Sylvia Colitis from upstate New York was one such pioneer whose dreams were dashed by Morse's breakthrough. See what I did there. Colitis had invested thousands of her husband's savings into R&D around a tongue-based method of telegraphy. For example, translates as, "Sadly, it's soup once more for dinner." Translates as, "The 8:15 from Bristol has been delayed." And translates as, "Think it's time we should probably call for the midwife." Colitis never realized a fully functioning system, as she was susceptible to extensive and painful bouts of oral fungus. But of course, there was one other form of communication taking Western Europe by storm: the postal service.
In the year penny postage was instituted, the Postmaster General's office was flooded with designs for the first stamp.
Montague Hawkmouth is a rare stamp dealer based here in this shop on Charing Cross Road in London, which has been in his family for generations.
The stamps I deal in are rare. I'm not. There's loads of people like me.
What, you've been cloned? Anyway, can you elucidate on the designs received for the first penny stamp?
Looking back now, it seems crazy that anyone would have wasted their time submitting designs when the Royal Mail was only ever going to put an image of Queen Elizabeth on the stamp.
You mean Victoria?
Fuck me, another Monday morning quarterback. Do you want to hear about these designs or not? I mean, people sent their family portraits in, sketches of favourite pets. One bloke from Newcastle suggested the stamp should feature a topological map of the sewage system underneath his house.
Oh, you mean like the map of the London Underground? Huh, how creative.
No, it was fucking insane. The deluge of suggestions was such that the Royal Mail was unable to process a letter, its day-to-day job, for over 7 months.
Weren't there also proposals for the adhesive on the rear of the stamp?
Christ, yeah! Pig saliva, the orangey bit in a Jaffa cake. The list was endless. Daffodil gum was the obvious choice in the end.
I thought it was the acacia plant. Oh, I see. Right. I'll get my coat. By 1840, Charles Goodyear was vulcanizing his Wellingtons, and the race was on for the first chemical fertiliser. John Bennett Laws had stolen the march by setting up a research centre in the Hertfordshire town of Harpenden. Caroline Brownacres is currently a research scientist at the experimental station and has kindly joined us today to enlighten us on the other horses in the race.
Hello, Sir Roland.
I should probably have said other donkeys in the race, as their preparations weren't up to much, right, Miss Brownacres?
They did leave a little to be desired, in all honesty. While John Laws focused on a superphosphate by reacting bones with sulfuric acid, less rigorous scientific minds were working on concoctions that were out of left field, to say the least.
I see you have some jars with you containing said concoctions.
This first mixture, from the Dean of the Abbey School in St. Albans, was a blend of different eggs.
Jesus, that stinks.
He used poached eggs, scrambled eggs, fried eggs, and a mushroom omelette. He tested it on everything from corn to broad beans, but only succeeded in obtaining a cease and desist order from the parish council for the incredible stench he'd created. The second mixture...
Sorry, that's making me dry heave.
This concoction of bat's piss, vole spunk, and English mustard wiped out a whole crop of broccoli when Hattie Anthrax sprayed it on a field in Lincoln using a bicycle pump.
You're not seriously going to take off that third lid, are you?
And finally, this third blend of rotting dog snouts was seized by West Midlands police before Norris carpet hands could spread it anywhere. The sample I have here remains the world's most toxic material. Are you all right, Sir Roland?
Within a decade, Humphrey Davy would give us the Davy lamp. James Francis would invent the Francis turbine. Dave Concrete would come up with reinforced concrete. And William Hydraulic Accumulator would invent the safety pin. But the 19th century was not all about scientific progress. Social change was also on the agenda. Reformation in the 1800s impacted society on various levels and would lift the hearts and souls of men and women across the globe, unless, that is, if some buffoon got it arse-way backwards. Next time on A Brief History of Failure, as words such as democracy, ideology and rationalism enter the public psyche for the first time, I'll be asking a descendant of the Bronte sisters, what are the ingredients of a stonking bestseller?
When Wuthering Heights first went on sale at W.H. Smythe and Daughters, you couldn't give it away as toilet roll. Of course, this was a snide version written by Graham Bronte, the sisters' jealous half-witted brother.
And as temperance is the order of the day, I'll be exploring how US breweries managed to keep their heads above water.
After Temperance Society members broke into our brewery for the 8th time in one night, we began disguising the bottles of beer by putting little knitted jumpers on them. Unfortunately, committed temperance nutjobs saw through this guise and smashed a lot to fuck.
And while the California gold rush gets underway, I'll be investigating the failed Bruges banana rush, the hopeless Peking duck rush, and the senseless loss of life around both of these ridiculous charges. All this and more next time on A Brief History of Failure. A Brief History of Failure was written, produced and performed by me, Aid Corey. A book of this podcast is available on Amazon.